everyone. My name is Lynette Sacchetto, and welcome to Lynette Live, which is a real estate podcast. And today we're going to talk about everything within digital conveyancing and escrow here in the UAE. And I am joined by Majdel Musa. Majdel, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with telling the people who are watching a little bit about yourself and your context of who you are and what you have been doing here in Dubai, specifically within the real estate sector.
So again, my name is Majdel Musa, and I have been in Dubai for 10 years or over 10 years now. And I started actually at the land department. That was my very first job. I was working at the land department, and I was teaching the licensing courses. So brokers, property managers, valuers, basically anybody who needed a license went through me. And I was also advising RERA on the official forms and other issues that they requested information on. And the last year, I've been back to teaching the licensing courses. Now that it's been privatized, it's no longer with the land department. And I've been teaching the licensing course for Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and then also courses like anti-money laundering for the real estate sector in the UAE.
Interesting. So I do have some questions on AML, which is anti-money laundering, but I'm going to save that towards the end of the show. And just to let everyone know who I am, I have been in the real estate industry here. Majdel, I've known you probably as long as you've been here. Yeah. So a little bit over 10 years. I've been in the real estate technology sector within prop tech, and recently started and launched Real Trust, which is a digital conveyancing and escrow services company here in Dubai. And for those of you who may not know, Majdel is our director of operations and legal at Real Trust. Yeah. And I'm super happy and excited to be working with her. I knew the first time that we met, and I believe it was at a Dubai Land Department event. I think it was a think tank or something.
An open day or something like that.
Yeah, and I know I'm like, okay, she's amazing. She's a fellow American, and I know I'm going to be working with her at some point within the Dubai real estate journey. And here we are today. I'm super excited.
Me too.
Now, I wanted to, so the point of this podcast is really to explain to both investors, buyers, and sellers, as well as to everyone within the real estate industry, what digital conveyancing is and escrow services today, and how we are helping to fix the pain points and the various different gaps in the market, which is really important to me, which is how I got into this part of the business. It's something that I've seen throughout the years, and didn't really have the time to adjust it because of the other initiatives that I was working on, and now I do, which is hence why Real Trust is in existence today. But let's start at the very basics. So we're from the States. And conveyancing, the word does not exist in the States. No.
At all. And when I came here, I was, what is conveyancing?
Yes.
It's a very British term, yes.
So in the States, what is equivalent to conveyancing? How would you explain it to an American?
So it depends to what your state you're from. Obviously, each state has their own real estate laws and their own customs. So some states will use a lawyer and then also a title company or escrow company to close through. And then in some states, it's just the title and escrow company that does all of the work to close the deal. So it really just depends. So in the States, for example, in Illinois, where I'm from Chicago.
Me too.
Yes. So there are lawyers being used. So that's what I was doing, was real estate deals. So we will get involved from the time after the contract is signed all the way through the closing, which is what we call a transfer here in Dubai. So we get involved and then we close at the title company, and the title company obviously issues title insurance, but they also they check everything to make sure title is clear, there's nothing, no encumbrances, no liens, anything like that. And then they also do the actual recording of the deed once the transfer takes place. So, and the exchange of funds. So they act as the escrowee in that case.
And who would have thought many, many years ago when you were in Chicago doing this as a lawyer that you will be doing it now today as a digital conveyancing, using a term out of the UK, and kind of reinventing how escrow services is done here in Dubai.
Yeah, I never would have imagined at all.
It's funny how life plays out, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so Conveyancing is equivalent to title and escrow in the US. It's equivalent to notary services in Europe.
Yes.
And obviously, conveyancing, that term comes from the UK. So they use solicitors, which is lawyers
So yes, they're the lawyers that do the transactions instead of court work.
in the UK, for
Yes.
example. So here, give us just an understanding of what is done in conveyancing within the real estate journey and transaction process here between the buyer and the seller, and what is their roles, what is the conveyancer roles, and what is the real estate agent or agency role.
So the conveyancer actually does quite a bit of the work after so there's a Form F, which is the land department's official sales contract between the buyer and the seller. So once that is signed, then the conveyancer gets engaged by the client. Obviously, we got to do the onboarding of the client, so KYC, the AML screenings, and then once they're onboarded, then the work begins. So, of course, a review, that's due diligence, will include the review of the Form F, and then if necessary, there will be an addendum that changes the terms and conditions that would be signed by both parties. And then also the verification of the title deed, which is super important, right, to verify who the owner is. So that's very easy these days because we've got the Dubai REST app and it's open
Because of
data now.
technology, yeah.
Yes, through the land department. And then if there are any mortgages, then the conveyancer gets involved. So if there's a mortgage on the seller's property, then they will make sure to get a release from the bank. And then also if the buyer is buying through a mortgage, same thing, they would make sure to follow up with the bank to see that they get the final offer letter. NOCs, so that's something that might be foreign to people who are not used to transactions in Dubai. So an NOC is a no objection certificate, and that is required from the developer, saying that there are no service charges that are outstanding or any kind of charges or anything due from the seller, and that the developer is fine with the sale going through. So that's also done. And then arranging all of the paperwork, collecting all of the checks. So for example, the conveyancer would act as the escrowee here, so meaning holding the deposit check from the buyer. If the seller issues a security check, same thing. And then also collecting all of the fees prior to the transfer. So there's the 4% transfer fee for the Dubai Land Department, and then also the registration trustees fees. And we also collect the commissions that are due to the brokers as well. So that is done through us as well. And then we arrange unless there's a bank involved, if there's a mortgage involved, then the bank will choose where to close with the registration trustee's office. But we will arrange the transfer and, of course, attend the transfer, disperse the checks as necessary. And then even after transfer is done, there's still some follow-up services. So, for example, making sure buyer received their keys, the access cards, etc., the copies of the title deed. So there's a lot of work to be done, as you can see.
Yes, and that is a lot of information that you
Yeah.
just gave us right now. So I want to break it down because this is really important, especially speaking from the perspective of Real Trust and why Real Trust was started, was because this is a very comprehensive process. It involves many different steps, many different entities and individuals. And this is where I saw a lot of the gaps and pain points personally as a consumer going through the process, both as the buyer and the seller, as well as on the tech side. There's zero digitization of this done currently today, which was the other aspect that we wanted to add into Real Trust with the digital conveyancing part. So let's start at the very beginning. Form F. So at Real Trust, as you are the Director of Operations and Legal, tell us a little bit of how you service Real Trust clients in the Form F stage.
So yes, I mean, that would be the most ideal thing, is that the client comes to us prior to signing Form F so that we can give them the terms and conditions to include in the additional terms and conditions section of Form F, because there is a section where you can add extra terms beyond what the land department has already placed there. So ideally, that's where we come into the picture, because then we can make sure that if there is ever a dispute, that it's there in the form and nobody's going to claim that the addendum is not valid. So, ideal situation.
And I think this is really important because you are a lawyer by training, by your background.
Yes.
Therefore, you have the experience and know how to put together contracts and addendums and read contracts and understand and digest current scenarios to put it into an addendum, into a sale purchase agreement, which is the Form F here. And I personally, as a consumer here in the market, that for me is very important because not every transaction is simple and not every transaction is the same, and every transaction is unique and requires some type of additional verbiage depending on the situation of the buyer, the seller, or both parties. And just in the time that we've been working through Real Trust, I've seen various different scenarios where they can become quite complex, and that additional verbiage within the addendum and Form F is essential to protect not only the buyer and the seller, but the agent and the agencies. So that brings me to my next question. Why is it so important, or is it important for a buyer or a seller to seek out conveyancing? Why is it important for the consumers in the transaction to have conveyancing?
I mean, it's very important because we are a neutral third party. We don't have a commission at stake. So it's not like we have to close the deal in order to get paid. We're getting paid regardless. So we do put the clients, their interests ahead of everything else. And so we make sure that we're crossing all of the T's, dotting all of the I's, and everything is done properly. So from the consumer's perspective, this is one reason to go with a neutral third party or conveyancer. And then also from the broker's perspective, it's very important as well because they don't have to do all of the paperwork. They don't have to do the due diligence. They can just concentrate on what they do best, which is the sales and the negotiations. And if there is some kind of dispute regarding, let's say, security deposit check or the deposit check or the security deposit, then they're not the ones holding onto it as the escrowee. It's with us. And then we can deal with the clients and the buyer and seller and let them know what's going to happen with it, rather than the parties coming to them and saying, hey, give me the check. No, give me the check. I want it. And going back and forth. It'll be, again, with us, and we take care of those issues.
Also, doesn't it put the agents into kind of a precarious scenario when there are conflicts with either their client, if their client is the buyer or the seller, or even what if the client is the buyer and the seller?
Yes.
Like, how does that work? I mean, that's a very fine line to walk as an agent, and you want to make all parties happy. You want the deal to close, but at the same time, everyone's pointing the finger at you when things go wrong. So tell me the benefit of conveyancing for that agent to kind of get them out of that situation.
Yeah, I mean, again, because we're acting as the escrowee, then when there is an issue, if there is a dispute that comes up, we would be the ones handling it with the client. So obviously they're going to go complain to the brokers and say, to the brokerage and say, hey, we want the check, but then they can say, okay, it's with the conveyancers, they're the escrowees, so they will be the ones to deal with this. And frankly, at the end of the day, anyway, we've got to hold on to the checks unless there's a written agreement between the parties or it goes to court and there's a court order telling us what to do. So, but again, we take that off of their plate so they can concentrate on their sales.
And as you mentioned, within the conveyancing process, there's so many different steps and parties involved, like, for example, mortgages. And I think that as an agent handled conveyancing, they're dealing with the buyer, the seller, the mortgage, getting a liability letter, getting a new mortgage on board if the buyer is getting a mortgage. If something happens within that cycle that doesn't work well, either the bank is taking too long or the buyer seller are not meeting their requirements, they're the ones that everyone's pointing their finger to the agent to say, fix this, fix this, fix this.
Exactly.
As a conveyancer.
Yes. So again, we would get involved just like we do at the beginning stages, either before Form F is signed or afterwards with the addendum, and we can come up with further addenda if required to either push back the transfer date or whatever it is we need to do. We put in additional language. Whatever it is that needs to be done, we can do it.
And the beauty of being that neutral third party is that, again, like you said, we are not part of the deal. We're not commission driven. And we are handling all of the parties and all of the entities involved, have communication with the buyer, the seller, the banks, the developers, the agent to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Agent job is to sell property
Exactly.
or to find property for people to buy. It's not to be dealing with this admin and the paperwork and going back and forth. And that is the whole idea of that neutral third-party conveyancing, is that taking off that burden and the paperwork and all that so that the agent can do what they are best at, which is selling.
Exactly.
And we do what we are best at, which is conveyancing and escrow services. So for me, I always saw it as a win-win scenario. Coming from the States, title and escrow is like core in any transaction, and it's just a given that it goes to them. And, you know, the agent goes on with their life and sells and finds properties for their clients, and buyer sellers go to title, get everything sorted out there. And then at the end of closing, everyone's there. Well, today, you don't even need to go to closing because everything's digitized, and everyone's happy. So that's how I always saw it, and that's how I envisioned it. And this is how Real Trust came about. And this is what we are doing today, which is, it's very satisfying to see that we can plug into that process and keep all of the parties happy as a neutral third party, and keeping everyone's best interest in hand, whether it's the buyer, seller, the agent, or agencies, the owners, the brokerages. Now, let's talk a little bit about escrow. Now, this is a very complicated conversation because escrow as an activity does not exist here in the UAE. There is not a license available for escrow. It does not exist in DIFC. It does not exist in ADGM. So when I was doing the research and the findings to create Real Trust, I was actually shocked by the different ways people were going about escrow services and how foreign investors were just sending their funds here blindly and trusting basically anybody to hopefully get the deal done, and, you know, their funds gets dispersed appropriately. The big hurdle that we have here in the UAE is that when we buy property here, you have to produce a manager's check.
Yes.
And a manager's check has to come from a UAE bank. And if you do not have a UAE bank account, you cannot produce a manager's check. So this is where all of the creative ways of escrow services have been introduced here. I have seen where people send their funds to buy gold. They sell the gold, and then a manager's check gets produced. So people who send money here use foreign exchange because they need to convert their money, and the foreign exchange companies use third parties, and these third parties could be anyone from someone who knows someone at the bank who can get a manager's check to licensed authorities who are like fund managers or custodians or fund administrators to get the work done. Same as attorneys. There's some attorneys here that offer that service as well through third parties. So I found it very interesting when I was doing the research that these were the only options available. And quite frankly, it was alarming because as an investor, if I was told these options, let's say I was living in the US, I don't know anything about Dubai, and I'm told, okay, you need to send your money, it has to get exchanged, and it goes to somewhere else, and we have to produce. I would say no.
No.
Personally, I would say no. What have been your experiences here when you've been kind of understanding and learning how escrow services are done, and like where have been the big red flags for you, and what have you seen, or what have you seen us trying to fix?
Well, first of all, I think we need to talk about what escrow means, because
Yes.
a lot of people, especially brokers, the second you say escrow, they think about the off-plan escrow accounts, which are required by law to be put into where the buyer's funds are put into a RERA-approved bank account.
Which is amazing. That's
Yes,
great.
Yes, but that's what they think because that's all they've ever heard about escrow. So escrow just means that a neutral third party is holding the funds. So that's it. That's the basic definition of it. So what have we seen? So like you said, all of these kind of shady backstreet kind of deals going on.
Creative.
Yeah, creative. Yes, that's a nice way of putting it. So yeah, there are all sorts of things. And unfortunately, as you said, as of today, there is no actual escrow license at this point in all of the UAE
That's what
that
we're working
moves
on
forward.
currently
Yeah.
with the authorities. Yes,
Yes.
to do so. How I envision it and how I see it in my mind is how it's done in the U.S. And I know you cannot take something from the U.S. and do a copy paste here. I've been here 18 years, especially with technology. It just doesn't happen. But there are a few fundamental elements of it that we can, and these are the important ones. Meaning that third party that holds the funds, that escrow account, being able to disperse the funds based on instructions that you get from the buyer and the seller. So it's not like you, as the escrow account holder, you're the authority, and you're just the manager of these funds, and these funds are sitting in a UAE bank that's regulated by the UAE Central Bank. So you have instructions from your buyer or seller based on the transactions for a specific transaction, and then they get dispersed accordingly. This is the ideal world. We have created this process in-house in our creative way using licensed DIFC, DFSA, and ADGM authorities who are licensed to produce manager's checks, who are licensed to do foreign exchange. We also have the capability of taking cryptocurrencies and converting them either into cash into a UAE bank account or into a manager's check. We just completed one this morning, as you know. So, and it is VARA regulated.
Yes.
So everything that we do, and this was very important for me, and I know you with your legal background, it's important as well, is that everything that we do needs to be fully licensed, fully regulated. We do, as a corporate service provider, we have to do full KYC, AML, and we've been scouring the world for proper digital AML services for SMEs. So if you're out there, anyone who's listening, that's a really good idea. Good business to put forth here,
Yes, please.
specifically in this region, because there's a huge gap and there's a lack of it here. So that was really important for us. And I'm happy to say, as every day progresses and as we get new cases, and as I said, every case is unique. So as we're going through and learning how to do it properly regulated, it's quite interesting because we're able to create it, and we know how it should be in theory, how it's done in the US, adapting it to here in the UAE, while still in parallel working with the authorities to do a proper escrow services or account, I should say, here in the UAE. So going into the digitization route. So this was also obviously my background being prop tech, worked on many initiatives, B2B and B2C here in real estate, technology. I always, as I said earlier, I always saw this gap with conveyancing, that it was just a very manual process. You can go into the largest brokerages here in the UAE and everything's still done on Google Sheets.
Right. Yeah.
And because there's so many different parties involved, it's hard to digitize the entire process. And we've been able to do this internally. And every day we're improving, every day we're adding. As we add partners, we're coming up with new ideas, and that's part of building tech. But we've been able to digitize the conveyancing process, whereas a client coming in, they get access to their client portal, they get sent a welcome email. We do all the KYC, AML through their portal. They upload their forms. It's done digitally. Once they get approved and onboarded, they get to see their processes, their conveyancing process in real time as we're going through all the steps with the various different entities and partners involved. So whether it's mortgage, Dubai Land Department, working with the agents, getting the NOC from the developers, they get to see this in real time, which was really important for me. As a consumer going through the process, I was always in the dark. And actually what ended up happening with the last few ones especially, I ended up doing conveyancing myself.
Oh my God.
I was just like, okay, fine.
let me do it.
I don't know what's going on. This is not working. This needs to happen. Hello, everyone. We need to get this going. So, but that's just my personality. So I understand the pain points from the different perspectives, which is why it was really important for me to do the digital conveyancing part. And then again, as we spoke about for the escrow services, it was just to bring in that fully licensed, regulated route to protect the foreign investors coming in, to protect their funds, to make them feel secure. The process is secure. So with our escrow services, once the funds come in, typically within 24 to 48 hours, managers' checks are produced depending on their currency and where it's coming from, as well as for those who are purchasing with the cryptocurrency, same day. It gets converted in same day. If it's any other currency, it's next day into a manager's check or deposit into a bank account here in the UAE if you have a UAE bank account. So, and all of this you can see digitally on the back end, and it is extremely transparent, which was one of the other goals that I was after, because the real estate transaction process here is not transparent in any way, shape, or form to the consumer. And there's so many more gaps and pain points to pick and to try to fix, but these are the ones we are concentrating
Yes,
on for now.
one thing at a time.
One thing at a time. Now, another thing that we wanted to offer, because we also saw a gap and we were asked for by clients, was other real estate services. So we added other services to Real Trust to service our clients at hand, or our current clients, client base. And they all revolved around the real estate journey and the real estate purchase or selling process. So they are things of like creating a property holding company, whether it's in a free zone or offshore, creating DIFC or ADGM or RAC foundations to secure their wealth and their confidentiality. We also offer will preparation, as I firmly believe that anyone who buys property here should have a will to protect their assets. We also offer wills for Muslims. That option is available to have non-Sharia compliant wills, correct?
Yeah, out of Abu Dhabi Civil Court, yes.
And this has been a demand. There's been a lot of requests for it, which is actually how the DIFC foundations came about, because the wills are incorporated into the DIFC foundation. Regardless of whether you're Muslim or not, you get a non-Sharia. Is that right to say,
Sharia.
a non-Sharia compliant?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's actually how it evolved from years ago. And so these are the type of services that we offer, as well as mortgage services for non-residents, for expats, just to kind of be that one-stop shop and not have so many different entities involved within the transaction, which is what makes it so fragmented. And what we have found is from our partners, especially our agent partners, this is very much welcome, because it kind of alleviates having them to kind of run around and try to find all these partners who are established, who have a good reputation. Every one of our partners we have used personally for our own personal transactions. So that's another unique selling point that we have at Real Trust. Okay, Majel. So I wanted to ask you about AML, anti-money laundering checks, because it's kind of it's a big topic. A lot of people have questions about it within the industry, because from my understanding, and let me see if I can explain this properly, if you have a broker buying or selling brokerage license, you must do AML for all your clients,
Correct, yes.
regardless if they're tenants looking to rent.
So if you have the license activity that states that it's for buying and selling of real estate, you do, as a brokerage, have to do the AML screenings for the clients. And you also obviously have to report any suspicious activities. And then there's also the requirement under Circular 5 of 2022 that was issued by the Ministry of Economy, because the Ministry of Economy is the supervisory authority for real estate brokerages, that all brokers, so not even just the brokerages, the brokers themselves have to report transactions that are over 55,000 or over in cash. So anything over 55,000. And then also if cryptocurrency is used, and that's for either a part or the whole amount of the purchase price, or if they've even converted the crypto into cash to do the purchase. So in those three circumstances, the broker has to report, and it's called a real estate activity report. They've got to file it with the Financial Intelligence Unit. Now that's going to be, of course, through the compliance officer of the brokerage, which is a requirement for all brokerages to have. But they do have to keep proof that they've actually done their part and gone to the compliance officer and asked them to report the transaction.
You mean you as an agent?
Yes. So they need to keep proof. So whatever the system is internally, whatever policy they came up with, if they report it through CRM, through WhatsApp, through an email, whatever it is they came up with for the reporting mechanism, they've got to keep proof of that. So print it out, take a picture of it, take a screenshot, whatever it is that you need to do to protect yourself as a broker. Because if it isn't reported at the end of the day by the compliance officer and the authorities come to the brokerage and they want to go after the broker, they can protect themselves and say, I did my job. It was the other party that failed to do theirs. So that's
What's the
very important.
ramification to the broker? Let's start there. What's the ramification to the actual broker, the agent, if something goes the wrong way and the authorities come and say, did you do this? And if they didn't, for example.
Yeah. So, I mean, for that particular circular, for those three instances, it isn't clearly written into the law what the penalties are. But in general, if you do violate anti-money laundering regulations, there is a fine between 100,000 and it could go up to 5 million for individuals. And then for companies, it could go up to 50 million. And then we're also talking about suspension of a license, even the closing of the license. They could just shut down the whole company. So there are a lot of penalties and jail time, by the way.
This is serious.
So yes, it's very serious. So this is something that all brokerages and brokers need to really pay attention to.
If you are speaking to a broker, what would be your advice to them?
Well, I mean, they are taking it seriously, especially because UAE just in this past February got off of the gray list, right?
Yes.
The FATF's gray list. And so it's very important to stay off of the gray list, right? And we've had, unfortunately, I'm not going to go deep into it, but unfortunately, some negative media about Dubai and the money laundering. Now, do they like to take shots at Dubai? Yes. So part of it is that. But the authorities will definitely crack down on it after this. They've got to, right? So it does need to be taken seriously. So last year, they actually published the numbers, so the penalties for Q1 of 2023. So they suspended 50 companies for a period of 3 months from doing any business just for not having registered on the Go AML portal with the Financial Intelligence Unit. So just that. They punished them. They didn't let them do business for 3 months. And then in Q1, I believe it was 75.9 million dirhams in penalties to companies for violating the regulation. So they are taking it seriously and they are cracking down. So brokers do need to take this seriously.
Yeah, they do. And obviously, we at Real Trust take it very seriously as we've been going through all of the processes for AML. Now, that brings me to let's talk a little bit about foreign investors, specifically Americans coming into the market, since you and I are both American from Chicago.
Yes.
I have a very large personal network of Americans who have for years been investing in Dubai and constantly asking me for help and advice. And now I'm a little bit more active with that community on helping them invest into Dubai, with Real Trust being one component of it,
Yes.
with the digital conveyancing and the escrow services. What would be the top things that you would tell them?
I mean, they should take comfort that it is regulated, right? It's a very highly regulated industry. We have the land department that is in place. It's been in place since 1961, basically before UAE even came into being. And then we also, under the land department, have the Real Estate Regulatory Authority, or RERA, and they're regulating everything as well. They're coming out with the regulations for the brokers, the developers, basically everything, all the stakeholders in the industry. And so that's one thing to take comfort in, is that there are regulators here, so they don't have to worry about it being the Wild West, and that people can do whatever they want. It will be transferred properly. It will be transferred through the land department. The registration trustees' offices are licensed by the land department, and they are actually lawyers that are Emirati lawyers that are licensed to do these services for the land department. So that's the first thing that I would say, take comfort in that. And then also that there are official forms, as we talked about Form F prior. So that's the official sales agreement between the buyer and the seller. And you can add your own additional terms and conditions. As we said, that's where we come in as real trust and conveyancers to add additional terms. So there's that as well. And all of the banks, if you need to get a mortgage, they're all licensed by the central bank. They have to be. So everything here requires a license, and everything is regulated. So again, take comfort in that part of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think Dubai has been through many tests, especially during the financial crisis. We've learned, we've grown, we've added regulations, we've made it secure, especially to everyone investing, but to foreign investors particularly. I think now that we have services like the digital conveyancing and escrow services that put security and just the ease of mind to that foreign investor is really important. As well as, like you said, there's forms, there's everything's regulated, the mortgage market, and it's not difficult for a non-resident, for example, an American, to get a mortgage here, whether they're buying off plan, so a property that's under construction, or they're buying an existing property. They can get up to 75% financing on that. And it's actually much easier than getting a mortgage back home to get a mortgage here. You don't have as much, it's kind of like a low doc or no doc loan
Yes.
equivalent in the US to how it's done here for expats. And the interest rates are extremely competitive. We're at 4.25% to 4.5%, which is much better than the U.S., which
Yes.
currently is like between 6 to 7% mortgage rate. Low doc loan, and up to 75%. If you're buying an off plan, you can get up to 50% upon completion of the property and mortgage. And of course, the return on investment is incredible here in Dubai. And this is like what I spent my career on, is that real estate market intelligence and getting the real estate data to do reports and informing the market. And if you look at the ROI, just look at yields, like net yields. It's about 5% across the board if you want to just be generic here in Dubai. But if you want to get a little bit more specific, it can be anywhere between 5 to 7% net yield, depending on what area you're in. And this is conservative, the 5 to 7%.
Wow.
If you have short-term rentals or holiday homes, as we call them here, you get into the double-digit returns.
Wow.
If you have property like in the high touristic areas like Dubai Marina, downtown Dubai, you get really good returns. If you have properties in areas where people like to rent in, for example, you get really good returns. So the return on investment here is incredible. You don't have property tax, you don't have personal income tax like we do back home in the States. And that's something else that we're constantly looking at, is the new corporate tax law that was introduced here, which there's a lot to learn from.
Yes.
And that would probably be another podcast that we do, because we're still going through all the
requires.
regulations, and it's actually quite interesting
Yes.
what people will learn once we come out with that. It's out publicly, but it's just a matter of reading it, digesting it, and understanding how it pertains to the real estate sector, which is what we're looking at specifically. And then I always go back to I like to call them our core stats, but Dubai is the happiest place on earth. It's the safest place in the world. And for the last 2 years, TripAdvisor was the #1 touristic destination in the world. For Americans, they were #5 of the tourists coming in. This is from TripAdvisor, of tourists coming to Dubai. And we're seeing a lot more Americans travel here for tourism, as well as looking to invest. And it's a cosmopolitan city. The infrastructure is amazing. You have the top restaurants, chefs here.
Super clean.
Super clean, very safe. I mean, it's for me, it's a win-win for everyone, which is why we have a lot of investors coming in from the States.
And we also have a lot of laws in place to protect investors. So particularly with the off-plan law, off-plan construction and projects, there are a lot of laws, like the RERA-approved escrow account that's required to put the buyer's funds in to protect the buyers. So yes, we have a lot here that's something that the buyers should take comfort in.
Yeah, especially so when you talk about off plans, it's very important to note that Dubai Land Department and municipality, they're constantly doing checks on a periodic basis of the construction status. And how the money is released from escrow account to the developer is based on these inspections.
Yes.
And of course, so the escrow account is open for the development in a UAE regulated UAE central bank regulated account, and the funds are held there. They cannot be taken by the developer. The investor deposits the funds or transfers the funds directly from their accounts to this escrow account,
Yes.
which is publicly available for everyone to see on the Dubai Land Department website as well as the Dubai Rest app. So for those of you who don't know, the Dubai Land Department Rest app is basically your go-to mobile app for everything real estate related in Dubai. You see all the developers there, you see their licenses, all the real estate brokers there, their licenses, their offices. If you own property here, you see all of your properties, if they're tenanted, who the tenant is, their ijari contracts, which is the rental contracts. You see everything. And this is how you manage your properties here in the UAE, which is amazing because we don't have this in the States.
No.
This does not exist.
No. It's really for literally all of the stakeholders in the market. And you can do, like you said, every type of transaction. So REST actually stands for real estate self-transaction. So really they made it for everybody to be able to do their own business on the app.
Yeah, it's fully digital. So going back to the off plan, everything is very secure for the investor. It's when I discuss off plan projects with foreign investors, with my personal network, I'm super comfortable doing it because I know that they're fully protected if they do decide to invest in an off-plan project. I know their funds are protected. And of course, you're focusing on the projects and the developers that have good reputation. And on Dubai Rest app, they're all, they get rated, correct?
Yes. So developers, the brokers, the brokerages, everybody has a rating. So yes, you can look at that as well.
It's a very transparent real estate market. Yes, there are
Thanks
some
to
gaps.
you, by the way.
The open data was a very big part of it. Thank you. There are, yes, many gaps and pain points that we need to fix. But the beauty of it is that being in Dubai, it's very agile. And we have the opportunity to create these digital products and these processes. We're empowered by the Dubai Land Department and by the government to do so. And when they can help, they do help us. So real trust, there's a lot to be done there, especially on the regulatory side. But I'm confident that it will happen. And I'm looking forward to see what next year looks like and how much we've been able to disrupt the industry.
We always love a good disruption, right?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Well, Majdel, thank you so much for joining me on Lynette Live, which, by the way, was coined by Sylvia.
We love
Golden
Sylvia.
Nuggets. Yes, we do love Sylvia. So I know I haven't decided on a new career to host podcasts. This is just for ourselves, just to put some information out there about the real estate industry, what is happening. I'm a huge fan of education, B2B, B2C, and Real Trust follows that ethos. So thank you again. I'm sure you're going to be back on.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for all your insight and knowledge.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for joining Lynette Live. I would have to say this is episode 1, even though there was a beta 1 and 2, but let's call this episode 1. Stay tuned for more real estate insights, data, prop tech, education about the real estate market here in Dubai. Talk to you guys later. Ciao.